Two white police officers tied a black man to a lamppost, thinking it was a harmless joke. What they didn't realize was that their victim wasn't just any man, and their actions would soon upend their lives and shake their community to its core. This is more than a story about injustice. It's about courage and transformation. Stay tuned to uncover the full story, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring content. Fair Creek, a small town in Mississippi, appears tranquil with its dirt roads and weathered old buildings. However, beneath this calm exterior lie deep fractures of racial division and prejudice that have lingered for generations. In this setting, Darnell Hayes emerges, a distinguished former FBI investigator recently appointed as the town's first black police chief. Known for his determination and integrity, Darnell arrives not only to lead, but also to deliver the much-needed change the town has long resisted. From the moment he sets foot in Fair Creek, Darnell senses the quiet tension in the air. The scrutinizing stares, hushed whispers, and cautious attitudes from the locals make it clear he is unwelcome. In a town where power has long been held by a select few, Darnell's presence challenges deeply entrenched traditions. Yet, he understands that his mission goes beyond reforming the police department. It involves confronting the entrenched biases and injustices that the community has silently tolerated for years. With unyielding resolve, Darnell is ready to face the challenges ahead, knowing that justice and fairness must prevail. For him, Fair Creek is more than just another assignment. It is a battleground for proving that change is possible, no matter the obstacles. On a crisp early morning, as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the trees, Darnell Hayes stepped out for his routine jog. Clad in simple running gear, this wasn't just exercise for him. It was his way of connecting with the rhythms of Fair Creek, the small town in Mississippi, where he had recently been appointed police chief. However, the calm of the morning was shattered when a police cruiser approached him slowly, its presence a harbinger of confrontation. Inside the car were Greg Simmons and Tom Raynor, two white officers who had served in the department for years. Accustomed to wielding their authority without accountability, they spotted Darnell and immediately grew suspicious. To them, a black man jogging in casual attire did not fit their vision of who belonged in their town. With smug confidence, Greg stepped out of the car and called out, "Morning, what are you doing out here?" Darnell calmly responded, "Just jogging." His composed demeanor only seemed to irritate the officers further. "Jogging, huh?" Tom sneered, stepping out to join Greg. "Not sure this is the right place for you." What began as an unfounded interrogation quickly escalated into an act of public humiliation. Despite Darnell's calm and measured responses, Greg and Tom decided to teach him a lesson. They handcuffed him and, ignoring his protests, drove him to the center of town, where a tall lamppost stood in the middle of the square. There, in front of a growing number of curious onlookers, they tied Darnell to the lamppost with a rope. "Let this be a lesson about wandering where you don't belong," Greg announced loudly, making sure the small crowd heard every word. A few bystanders pulled out their phones to record the scene, but no one stepped in to stop the officers. Greg and Tom's smug smiles conveyed their belief that they could act with impunity, without fear of consequences. What they didn't realize was that their actions were sparking a storm they couldn't control. One of the videos captured by a bystander was quickly posted online and spread like wildfire. Outrage erupted across social media platforms. Comments flooded in. "Is this how police treat people here? Who is this man, and why are they humiliating him like this?" The incident, initially confined to the quiet streets of Fair Creek, rapidly gained national attention. Through it all, Darnell remained calm, his unshakable composure drawing the curiosity of those who witnessed the event. He didn't react to the taunts or the stares because he knew something they didn't. The man they had just publicly humiliated wasn't an outsider or a stranger. He was their new police chief, and soon Greg and Tom would find themselves on the other side of justice. The tension was palpable as Darnell Hayes walked through the doors of the Fair Creek Police Department later that day, now dressed in his crisp police chief uniform. The badge gleamed prominently on his chest, a symbol of authority and justice. His calm yet imposing presence commanded silence as conversations came to a halt. Officers exchanged puzzled glances, and whispers rippled through the room. Darnell's gaze was steady as he scanned the room, his focus eventually landing on Greg Simmons and Tom Raynor, who were laughing in the corner. Unaware of the storm brewing around them, Greg and Tom were recounting the events of the morning, their mockery tinged with self-satisfaction. "Did you see his face?" Greg said, roaring with laughter. "He looked like he didn't know what hit him," Tom smirked, leaning back in his chair. "I told you, guys like that don't belong here. We showed him who's in charge." But their laughter was short-lived. As Greg glanced up, he froze. His expression shifted from amusement to disbelief as he recognized the man standing in full uniform. Tom turned to look, and the color drained from his face. Darnell's piercing gaze met theirs, and the realization hit them like a ton of bricks. The man they had humiliated that morning was now their superior. The room grew unbearably silent as Darnell approached them, his footsteps echoing on the tiled floor. Without raising his voice, he addressed the room. "Good afternoon," he began, his tone measured yet commanding. "I am Darnell Hayes, your new police chief." A ripple of shock spread through the department, leaving even the most seasoned officers at a loss for words. Greg and Tom avoided eye contact, their earlier arrogance replaced by visible unease. Darnell didn't directly confront Greg and Tom in that moment. Instead, he delivered a speech about the principles he stood for: accountability, fairness, and justice. He emphasized the need for change within the department, speaking firmly but without anger. "We are not just enforcers of the law," he said. "We are stewards of dignity and respect. If anyone here believes they cannot uphold those values, this is your chance to leave." Meanwhile, outside the department, the viral video of Greg and Tom's actions was gaining momentum. Thousands of viewers across the country expressed outrage, with hashtags like Justice for Thierjerner trending on social media. News outlets began picking up the story, amplifying the calls for accountability. Local residents, emboldened by the growing attention, began to share their own stories of mistreatment by the police, painting a damning picture of a department riddled with abuse. Behind the scenes, Darnell initiated an internal investigation into the actions of Greg and Tom. He reviewed the video, questioned witnesses, and delved into their records, uncovering a pattern of misconduct that had gone unchecked for years. The evidence piled up, leaving no doubt about the need for accountability. By the end of the day, it was clear the morning's humiliation had set into motion a chain of events that would not only expose the truth, but also force Fair Creek to confront its darkest realities. For Greg and Tom, the days of acting without consequence were over. The town hall was packed that evening, buzzing with tension and anticipation. Word had spread quickly about the viral video showing Greg Simmons and Tom Raynor tying a man to a lamppost. The revelation that the man in question was none other than Fair Creek's newly appointed police chief, Darnell Hayes, had ignited both outrage and curiosity among the town's residents. People who had rarely attended public meetings were now gathered, eager to hear what their new leader would say and how he would handle the growing scandal. Darnell entered the room, his uniform immaculate, his demeanor calm but resolute. As he stepped onto the stage, the murmurs in the room died down. He stood at the podium, surveying the crowd, a mix of anger, shame, and hesitant hope reflected in their faces. Among them were Greg and Tom, seated near the back, their usual confidence replaced by visible unease. Darnell took a deep breath and began. "Good evening, Fair Creek," he said, his voice firm yet steady. "I stand before you tonight, not just as your police chief, but as a member of this community, one who believes in justice, accountability, and respect for all." His words carried weight, cutting through the silence like a knife. "What happened yesterday was not just a personal attack on me. It was an attack on the values that this town should hold dear." He then addressed the viral video, showing no hesitation in acknowledging the truth. "Many of you have seen the footage. You've witnessed actions that were not only unprofessional, but also demeaning. Let me be clear. This behavior has no place in Fair Creek's police department, or anywhere else." Darnell paused, letting his words sink in. He shifted his focus toward Greg and Tom, whose discomfort was now palpable. "Effective, immediately," he continued, "Officers Greg Simmons and Tom Raynor are suspended without pay, pending a full investigation into their actions. Accountability begins here and now." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a wave of applause and cheers. Some residents stood up, shouting words of support. Others looked visibly relieved, as though a weight had been lifted. Greg and Tom, meanwhile, shrank in their seats, their faces pale as the reality of their situation hit them. But Darnell wasn't finished. He turned his attention back to the crowd. "This incident is not isolated. It's a symptom of deeper issues within this department, and perhaps within this community. Change doesn't come easy, but it starts with acknowledging the problem and committing to doing better." As the meeting continued, residents began to share their own experiences. One by one, they spoke up. Stories of mistreatment, intimidation, and fear that had lingered in silence for years. Darnell listened intently, taking notes, his presence reassuring yet unyielding. By the end of the night, the town hall had transformed into more than just a meeting. It was a turning point, a collective reckoning that would redefine Fair Creek's future. Darnell's firm yet empathetic leadership had not only exposed the truth, but also ignited the possibility of lasting change. The following morning, Fair Creek awoke to a sense of change. The suspension of Greg Simmons and Tom Raynor had sent shockwaves through the town, marking a decisive shift in how accountability was enforced. But for Darnell Hayes, this was just the beginning. Sitting at his desk in the police department, he began laying the groundwork for long-term reforms to rebuild trust between the force and the community. Word of the viral video and the town hall meeting continued to spread, drawing the attention of state authorities and civil rights organizations. Representatives from the district attorney's office arrived in Fair Creek to launch a formal investigation into Greg and Tom's history on the force. Their records revealed a disturbing pattern of misconduct, excessive use of force, unwarranted arrests, and numerous complaints that had been ignored under the previous leadership. The weight of their actions had finally caught up to them, and Greg and Tom were now facing not just disciplinary action, but potential criminal charges. Meanwhile, in the community, the mood was a mix of outrage and empowerment. Residents, who had long felt voiceless, began coming forward, emboldened by Darnell's leadership and the public exposure of the department's flaws. At a community forum organized by Darnell, people shared stories of mistreatment and prejudice they had experienced at the hands of the police. These stories were heartbreaking but also cathartic, as residents felt, for the first time, that they were being heard. Darnell listened to each story with patience and empathy, taking detailed notes and promising action. "This isn't just about holding two officers accountable," he told the crowd. "It's about transforming this department into something you can trust. Change will take time, but it will happen." His sincerity resonated with the audience, many of whom nodded in agreement or voiced their support. Behind the scenes, Darnell worked tirelessly with his team to implement immediate reforms. Mandatory ethics training was introduced for all officers, alongside new policies that emphasized community policing and de-escalation techniques. He also established an anonymous reporting system, allowing residents and officers alike to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. To lead by example, Darnell made it a point to be visible in the community, attending local events, chatting with residents, and listening to their concerns directly. Meanwhile, Greg and Tom's situation worsened as the public outrage grew louder. News outlets picked up the story, amplifying calls for justice. Under mounting pressure, the district attorney's office announced that formal charges would be filed against both officers. For Greg and Tom, the consequences of their actions were no longer abstract. They were unavoidable. As Fair Creek began its journey toward healing, Darnell's leadership became a symbol of hope and renewal. The town, once divided by prejudice and silence, was now united in a shared goal: to build a fairer, more just community. Though the road ahead would be long, the people of Fair Creek were ready to walk it together, guided by a leader who had proven that accountability and compassion could bring about real change. Fair Creek was no longer the same town it had been just weeks earlier. The incident with Greg Simmons and Tom Raynor had sparked a wave of change, transforming a community once burdened by prejudice and silence into one that began to embrace accountability and hope. For Darnell Hayes, this was not just a personal victory, but a moment that validated his purpose as a leader and a champion of justice. As the dust settled, the reforms initiated by Darnell began to take root. Ethics training and community policing programs were rolled out across the department, ensuring officers understood their responsibilities not just as enforcers of the law, but as stewards of respect and fairness. The anonymous reporting system proved to be a game-changer, empowering both officers and citizens to speak up about misconduct. Darnell also established open forums where residents could voice their concerns directly to the department. These steps weren't just policy changes. They were the foundation of trust that Fair Creek had long been missing. The impact of Darnell's leadership extended beyond the police department. The town square, where Darnell had been publicly humiliated, became a symbol of renewal. Weekly gatherings were held there, bringing together people from all walks of life to discuss ideas for improving their community. Families, business owners, and young activists collaborated on projects to beautify the town, while the conversations in these meetings often carried a tone of optimism and unity. Even those who had once been skeptical of Darnell began to see the changes taking shape. Mr. Carter, an elderly resident who had witnessed decades of injustice, reflected on the transformation with a mix of pride and hope. "I never thought I'd live to see this town turn a corner," he remarked to Darnell one afternoon. "You've shown us that change is possible." The ultimate vindication came when Darnell stood once again in the town square, this time at a celebration organized by the residents. Amidst cheers and applause, he addressed the crowd, reminding them that the journey to justice and equality was ongoing. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about all of us coming together to make Fair Creek better for future generations." Under Darnell's leadership, Fair Creek began to redefine itself. A town that had once symbolized silence and division was now a beacon of accountability, justice, and unity. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in years, the people of Fair Creek had hoped for a brighter future. Fair Creek had embarked on a transformation that once seemed impossible. Under Darnell Hayes' leadership, the small town began shedding its history of silence and division, embracing a future rooted in justice and accountability. The journey had been far from easy, but it was undeniable that progress was taking hold. The police department, once a symbol of unchecked power, had been restructured from within. Darnell's reforms, mandatory ethics training, community policing initiatives, and the introduction of an anonymous reporting system were reshaping the culture of law enforcement. Officers who once operated with impunity now faced clear standards of accountability. Darnell's emphasis on transparency and fairness inspired not only his team, but also the community they served. The town square, where Darnell had been humiliated, became a hub of renewal. Weekly community meetings and collaborative projects turned it into a place of hope and unity. Families worked together to repaint buildings, plant gardens, and revitalize public spaces. Conversations that once reflected division now centered on shared goals for the town's future. Darnell himself became a symbol of change, a leader who had faced injustice head-on and emerged stronger. His humility and determination resonated deeply with the people of Fair Creek, including those who had initially doubted him. As he walked the streets, shaking hands and listening to residents' concerns, he embodied the ideals of fairness and respect he championed. "This is just the beginning," Darnell often reminded the town. "Real change takes time and persistence, but we've already proven what's possible when we stand together." Fair Creek's transformation wasn't just about one man or one incident. It was a collective awakening. The town had finally found its voice, and for the first time in generations, the people of Fair Creek felt empowered to write a new chapter, one of justice, unity, and hope. The story of Darnell Hayes and the transformation of Fair Creek serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of accountability, courage, and collective action in confronting injustice. It teaches us that change, though challenging, is always possible when individuals and communities are willing to stand up for what is right. One key takeaway from the story is the value of perseverance. Darnell faced humiliation, prejudice, and resistance, yet he remained steadfast in his commitment to justice. This shows us that leadership requires both strength and humility. Strength to face adversity and humility to listen, learn, and collaborate with others. The story also highlights the role of community in driving meaningful change. In Fair Creek, progress was only possible when residents found the courage to speak up, share their experiences, and work together toward a common goal. It reminds us that silence can perpetuate injustice, but collective voices can create lasting impact. In our own lives, this story encourages us to take a stand against unfair practices, whether in our workplaces, neighborhoods, or broader communities. It reminds us to hold ourselves and others accountable while fostering empathy, understanding, and unity. Change begins with each of us, and together, we have the power to transform even the most entrenched systems of inequality. Today's story isn't just about facing injustice. It's a reminder that real change never comes easy. It requires courage, perseverance, and unity. If you were in Darnell Hayes' shoes, what would you do? Would you choose to fight for justice and transform the community, one, or stay silent to avoid conflict and protect yourself? 2. Leave a comment with 1 or 2 below to share your thoughts. I'd love to hear your choice and the reason behind it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss more meaningful stories like this one.